Let me tell you something. The world is facing a crisis. When nations fight, when people suffer, when families are torn apart by war, there are no winners. I have seen in my life that strength does not come only from muscles. It comes from unity, from leadership, from the courage to sit down and talk, even with your rivals. That is real power. Today we speak about something historic, trilateral talks with Trump, with Putin, and the vision to finally end the Russia-Ukraine war. This is not just politics, this is about humanity, about peace, about showing the world that leaders can rise above ego and conflict to create a future worth fighting for. And remember, the greatest victory is not defeating your enemy, the greatest victory is turning your enemy into a partner for peace. Strength is a word that people often misunderstand. Many think it is only about power, about showing dominance, about muscles, or about having the biggest weapons and the strongest armies. But I have learned through life, through struggle, through victories and failures, that true strength is much deeper. It is not about how hard you can hit, but how much discipline, control, and vision you can show when the pressure is highest. In war, nations flex their military might. They show their tanks, their missiles, their armies, but none of that makes them truly strong. It only shows their ability to destroy. Real strength, the kind that inspires generations, is found in the courage to lay down arms and extend a hand of peace. That takes guts. That takes more courage than any battlefield, because to choose peace is to take the risk of trust, to face criticism, to show vulnerability, and to put humanity above pride. When leaders choose to continue a war, they are simply repeating what has been done throughout history. It is the easy path. It requires no imagination, no higher vision, only anger and stubbornness. Anyone can wage war, but not everyone can stop one. To end conflict requires leaders to rise above their personal egos, their political ambitions, their desire to appear strong in the eyes of their people. It requires them to realize that the lives of millions are more important than their own reputation. That is what separates a true leader from a mere ruler. A ruler clings to power and fights to the last man, but a leader sacrifices his pride to create peace for his people. That is true strength. If you look at the world today, what we need is not more displays of power, but displays of humanity. Think about the soldiers on the front lines, the mothers who have lost their children, the children who will grow up without fathers, the families torn apart forever. Is that strength? No, that is weakness disguised as power. Strength is the ability to stop that suffering. Strength is to say, enough. We have lost too much already. We will not sacrifice another generation for the sake of pride. When leaders have the courage to sit together, even when they hate each other, even when they disagree on everything, and still talk for the sake of peace, that is when they show the highest form of strength. The greatest champions in history were not only the ones who conquered land or won wars, but the ones who built peace and unity. They were the ones who understood that there is no glory in endless destruction. A strong leader is the one who can imagine a better future, one where children can laugh without fear, one where nations can trade, cooperate, and build together rather than destroy each other. That vision requires imagination, and imagination requires courage. It is always easier to continue the fight than to say, let's try something different. But strength is about doing what is hard, not what is easy. I have seen in my own life that challenges make us grow. If we only take the easy road, we remain the same. But when we step out of our comfort zone, when we face the fear of the unknown, that is when we grow. And the same is true for nations. Choosing peace, choosing dialogue is uncomfortable. It means facing criticism. It means being misunderstood. It means taking a leap of faith that others may mock. But it is precisely in that discomfort that nations grow stronger. Because when peace is achieved, it creates possibilities that war can never offer. It creates trade, prosperity, innovation, friendship, and a sense of shared destiny. It builds bridges where once there were walls. And only the strong can build bridges because the weak only know how to destroy them. That is why true strength is never about the ability to fight, but about the courage to walk away from the fight. It is about the courage to value life over death, creation over destruction, the future over the past. It is about standing before the world and saying, "We are strong enough not to need war to prove ourselves." This is the kind of strength that lasts through history, the kind of strength that inspires not fear, but respect. And respect is far more powerful than fear, because fear dies the moment the threat is gone, but respect lasts for generations. Unity is the most underestimated force in the world. People often believe that progress comes from individuals standing alone, showing their independence and proving their power. But history has shown over and over that the greatest achievements of humanity have always come when people, when nations, when leaders chose to come together. Unity is not about agreeing on everything or pretending that differences do not exist. It is about recognizing that even with our differences, even with our disagreements, we are stronger when we work side by side than when we tear each other apart. When leaders like Trump and Putin, who have stood on opposite sides, and nations like Russia, Ukraine, and the United States decide to sit down at one table, they are not just showing diplomacy, they are showing strength through unity. Because when leaders unite, even for a moment, they create possibilities that no army, no weapon, no act of force could ever achieve. The power of unity can be seen everywhere in life. Think about a family. When the family is divided, every member suffers. But when they come together, they face the world with resilience. A single stick can be broken easily, but a bundle of sticks cannot. That is the law of strength through unity. In the same way, a nation standing alone may be vulnerable, but when it unites with others, when it builds partnerships, when it finds common ground, it becomes unshakable. This is not only true for nations, but for leaders as well. When leaders unite, they send a message to their people and to the world that peace is possible, that there is hope beyond conflict, that humanity is greater than political rivalry. War thrives on division. It survives because leaders and people focus on differences instead of commonalities. But unity destroys the very fuel of war. When two sides that once fought find a way to work together, the conflict loses its power. That is why unity is more powerful than any weapon. A missile can destroy a building, but unity can rebuild nations. A bomb can silence voices, but unity can inspire generations. This is the reason why the path to peace is always built on cooperation, on compromise, on the willingness to see the humanity in the other side. When leaders show unity, they give an example not only to their own nations, but to the entire world. Imagine what it would mean for young people to see leaders who were once divided by war now shaking hands and working together. That image would be more powerful than any speech, because it would teach them that even the deepest wounds can heal, that enemies can become partners, that hate can be replaced by cooperation. It would show them that strength is not in standing alone, but in standing together. And in a world filled with division, that example would be like a light in the darkness, guiding others toward peace. Unity also unlocks opportunities that division cannot. Nations at war spend billions on weapons, but nations at peace can spend billions on schools, hospitals, technology, and the future. Division wastes energy, but unity multiplies energy. It creates an environment where creativity and progress flourish. This is why the greatest achievements in history, from landing on the moon to defeating global diseases, have come when nations decided to work together. Alone, no one could have achieved them, but together, they were unstoppable. And the same principle applies to ending a war. No single leader can achieve peace alone, but when leaders unite, they create an unstoppable force that even history cannot ignore. Unity requires humility, and humility is one of the hardest things for powerful leaders to show. It means saying, "I cannot do this alone. I need you." It means acknowledging that no matter how strong a nation is, it still benefits from cooperation. It means accepting that peace requires more than one hand to hold the pen that signs an agreement. But when leaders have the courage to embrace humility, they gain something much greater than power. They gain the trust of the people, the respect of the world, and the chance to leave a legacy that will outlast their lifetimes. So when Trump, Putin, and others sit together for trilateral talks, the world will not just be watching the politics, it will be watching the possibility of unity. The possibility that leaders who represent different visions, different systems, different interests can still come together for the sake of peace. That is a message more powerful than any headline, because it shows humanity's greatest truth: we are stronger together than apart. And unity between leaders does not just end wars, it creates the foundation for a future where cooperation is normal, where peace is the expectation, and where nations look at each other not as enemies, but as partners in building a better tomorrow. Ego is one of the most dangerous forces in the world. It blinds people, it blinds leaders, and it blinds nations. Ego convinces a leader that admitting weakness will make them lose respect, when in reality it is the opposite. Ego tells them that to show power, they must never compromise, never bend, never listen. But history has proven that this path only leads to destruction. Nations have crumbled because of ego. Wars have lasted for decades because of ego. Millions have lost their lives because someone in power decided their pride was more valuable than peace. Ego is loud, it demands recognition. It thrives on conflict, but it cannot build, it can only destroy. Dialogue, on the other hand, is quiet, humble, patient, and difficult, but it has the power to create what ego never can: a sustainable future. When a leader is consumed by ego, every decision becomes about personal image rather than the people they serve. They care more about appearing strong than actually being strong. They care more about winning arguments than solving problems. They care more about humiliating their rivals than protecting the lives of their citizens. But true leadership is not about appearances, it is about outcomes. A leader who sacrifices his ego for the sake of dialogue is showing far more strength than a leader who clings to pride and prolongs conflict. It takes courage to fight a war, but it takes far greater courage to sit across the table from someone you once called your enemy and say, "Let's talk." That is not weakness, that is wisdom. That is vision. Dialogue requires the ability to see beyond yourself. It forces leaders to think not about how they will be remembered in the moment, but how their nations will live in the future. Ego is obsessed with the present, with the immediate satisfaction of looking powerful. But dialogue is focused on the future, on building something that will last long after speeches are forgotten and armies are withdrawn. When leaders choose dialogue, they are saying, "The future of our children matters more than my pride today." That is the difference between a politician and a statesman. A politician seeks short-term victory, but a statesman seeks long-term peace. The greatest leaders in history were never those who stood tallest in their pride, but those who bent their pride to serve their people. They understood that the role of leadership is not self-glorification, but service. They knew that ending suffering required compromise, patience, and humility. Some of the most celebrated moments in history came when leaders who once despised each other sat down and found a way to talk. They did not do it because they liked each other. They did it because they valued peace more than ego. That is what changed the course of nations, that is what prevented future wars, and that is what left a legacy greater than their own ambitions. Ego narrows vision. It convinces leaders that their own perspective is the only truth. But dialogue expands vision. It allows leaders to see through the eyes of others, to understand that even an enemy has fears, concerns, and goals. That understanding does not mean agreeing, but it creates the possibility of compromise. Without dialogue, the only option left is violence, and violence always costs more than words. Every bullet fired is a conversation that was never attempted. Every bomb dropped is a dialogue that was silenced. Dialogue has no victims, but ego leaves only casualties. When two sides sit at the table, something powerful happens. For a moment, ego is set aside and replaced with humanity. Leaders look into each other's eyes not as enemies, but as people, and in that moment they realize that both sides carry the same burden, responsibility for lives. That realization changes the tone of history. It allows cooperation to replace conflict, it allows trust to slowly grow, and it allows nations to move forward. This is not easy, and it will never be perfect, but it is always better than letting ego dictate the course of action. Because ego leaves destruction behind, while dialogue leaves possibilities. The world today is desperate for leaders who can rise above ego. People are tired of wars fought for pride, for territory, for the satisfaction of proving who is stronger. What the world needs are leaders who can admit that peace requires compromise. Compromise is not weakness. It is the recognition that no one can get everything they want without losing everything they have. Dialogue is the bridge that makes compromise possible. And only when leaders are willing to walk that bridge can nations escape the endless cycle of conflict. Every leader eventually leaves power, but the consequences of their ego remain. The ruins of cities, the graves of soldiers, the scars on families, all of these are monuments to the moments when ego triumphed over dialogue. But the roads, the schools, the trade partnerships, the cultural exchanges, these are monuments to dialogue. Leaders must decide what kind of monuments they want to leave behind. One path is temporary glory built on destruction. The other is lasting legacy built on peace. The choice is clear, but it requires the humility to silence ego and the courage to speak, listen, and create through dialogue. The idea of victory is often misunderstood. Many believe that victory means crushing your opponent, standing on top of the ruins, proving that you are stronger, louder, and more powerful. But that is only a shallow version of victory. True victory is not about destruction, it is about transformation. It is not about leaving your enemy defeated, it is about turning your enemy into a partner who walks beside you. This kind of victory is far more difficult to achieve, but it is also far more meaningful and lasting. History is filled with examples of battles won and enemies humiliated, but those victories fade quickly because resentment remains, hatred grows stronger, and eventually the cycle of conflict begins again. The only way to break that cycle is through transformation, through building trust where there was once suspicion, and through creating partnerships where there was once hostility. When enemies become partners, something extraordinary happens. What was once a relationship of fear becomes a relationship of cooperation. The resources that were once poured into war are redirected toward progress. The energy that once fueled destruction is turned into creation. Nations that once built walls between themselves begin building bridges. This is not easy, and it does not happen overnight, but it is the only kind of victory that endures. Because once two sides begin to work together, they create a shared future. And a shared future is stronger than any battlefield. Turning enemies into partners requires vision. A leader must be able to see beyond the present conflict and imagine a time when cooperation is possible. It requires courage to say, I know this person was my enemy yesterday, but tomorrow they can be my ally. It is easier to remain in hatred than to risk trust, but easy choices never create great outcomes. The great outcomes always come from the difficult decisions, from the willingness to take a step into the unknown, and from the strength to believe that even the fiercest rivals can change. That belief is what makes peace possible. The process of transformation begins with dialogue, with a willingness to talk and to listen. It begins with small steps, agreements on limited issues, acts of cooperation that may seem minor but build momentum. Over time, trust begins to form. Trust is fragile, but it grows stronger with each step forward. And eventually, what was once unthinkable becomes reality. Former enemies begin to cooperate on trade, on security, on culture, on technology. Their people begin to travel, to exchange ideas, to see each other not as faceless adversaries, but as fellow human beings. And in this process, nations discover that they are not so different after all. Their dreams are the same. Their struggles are the same. Their humanity is the same. That discovery is what transforms rivals into partners. The greatest victory is not the one that ends in silence after destruction, but the one that ends in laughter, in cooperation, in shared celebration of progress. A nation may gain territory through war, but it gains a future through partnership. A leader may win applause by defeating an enemy, but he wins history's respect by transforming that enemy into an ally. The world remembers those who chose peace not because it was easy, but because it was right, and their legacies last far longer than the legacies of conquerors. Conquerors are feared in their time, but peacemakers are remembered for generations. When enemies become partners, the benefits extend far beyond the leaders themselves. The people feel it most. They experience peace in their daily lives. They see opportunities open up where once there were barriers. They are freed from the fear of losing loved ones to war. Children grow up with hope instead of trauma. Businesses thrive because stability allows innovation. Cultures enrich each other because exchange replaces isolation. And all of this begins with one decision to transform enemies into partners. The courage to transform enemies comes from a deep understanding of what leadership truly means. Leadership is not about pride, it is about responsibility. It is about recognizing that every choice made affects millions of lives. A leader who understands this knows that the greatest service they can provide is not to secure their own power, but to secure peace for their people. And that peace can never come from endless conflict. It can only come when former enemies decide that cooperation is more valuable than hostility. That decision changes everything. History shows that once bitter enemies have often become the strongest allies. Nations that once fought bloody wars later became partners who built powerful alliances and reshaped the world together. This proves that transformation is not only possible, it is powerful. It shows that hatred does not have to be permanent, that enmity does not have to define the future. With courage, vision, and determination, enemies can become the very foundation of peace. And that kind of victory is far greater than anything achieved on a battlefield, because it does not end with one side's triumph. It begins with both sides rising together. History has shown us again and again that wars may create winners on the battlefield, but they create nothing but losers in life. The true champions are not those who build empires through blood, but those who build peace through vision, courage, and unity. Strength is not the roar of weapons, it is the silence after peace is made. Unity between leaders can achieve miracles that no army ever could. Dialogue has the power to heal what ego destroyed. And the greatest victory of all is not crushing your enemy. It is shaking his hand and walking together into a shared future. The world does not need more division. It needs leadership that dares to rise above pride, leadership that proves humanity is stronger than conflict. This is the moment to show that peace is not weakness, it is the ultimate strength, and it is the legacy worth leaving behind.